Not all ashes of war are created equal. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today to mourn the passing of many beloved ashes of war. These ashes of war have touched the lives of millions, inspired countless builds, and brought together gamers of all walks of min-maxing. We stand united in our grief for the passing of these tasteful additions to Elden Ring's combat, for we know that they will never be graced by the loving hand of Miyazaki for the rest of the game's lifespan. Today we celebrate the ashes of war that never got a chance to shine in the Elden Ring community. These ashes were robbed of the chance of ever being in anyone's god-tier, broken, busted, stupid, good, overpowered, best glitches, Elden Ring, best OP weapon, rune farming, goon bait, ash of war YouTube thumbnail. In these tender moments, we carry on their memory in silence. And also by buffing and fixing them so they're actually fucking useful and not overshadowed by these flashy, over-the-top, FPS-melting, one-shot ashes and skills that do way too much damage and have way too much poise bonuses. These ashes of war are dog for absolutely, positively no reason at all. I despise the notion that balancing is difficult and trying to fix neglected things is too much work and not worth it. I also despise the notion that fixing these neglected ashes of war will alter the balance of the game in a negative way. I think the neglect of these ashes of war is both evidence of FromSoft's half-baked attempts at balance and a verbal cop-out on their behalf. That's why I will be fixing them. And by them, I mean Charge Forth, Spinning Strikes, Stamp Sweep, Stamp Upward Cut, Square Off, Wild Strikes, Lion's Claw, Kick, Ground Slam, Golden Slam, Troll's Roar, Double Slash, Prelate's Charge, Spectral Lance, and Lifesteal Fist. Even if this video makes no impact whatsoever in the balancing department, I just wanted to demonstrate how simple it would be to balance these ashes of war. Keep in mind that this only really took me about 5 hours to complete. The answers aren't some profound puzzle to solve. The answers have always been there. And I am here to present them to you. Let's begin. Charge Forth's issues stem from its poor tracking and criminally low poise bonuses. To mitigate this issue, I've replaced its old level 2 hyper armor event with an event that will grant a flat 250 poise. As for its tracking, all I really needed to do was adjust the fourth turn speed value on its timeline from 150 to 300. These changes result in an attack that is both swift and demands respect for any opponent that makes the mistake of brashly trading with it. These changes should allow you to trade with medium-sized weapons. However, this attack can still be countered by jumps and strafing. The timing and accuracy of your strafe needs to be a bit tighter than before if you want to counter backstab it now. Spinning Strike's issues stem from its complete lack of poise bonuses and slow skill activation. To mitigate this, I added a flat poise bonus to the startup, idle, walking, and follow-up animations of this Ash of War. I took inspiration from Wild Strikes and applied the same poise bonuses to each animation. 180 poise for the startup, walking, and idle animations, and 300 poise for both follow-up animations. The startup poise event begins on frame 8, similar to Colossal Swords. To mitigate its speed problem, I've adjusted the light and heavy attack windows to start 10 frames earlier, allowing you to begin your follow-up attack earlier so you're less likely to be interrupted during this attack. Both of these changes allow you to make use of this Ash in ways you were previously not able to. The attack is still quite slow, but it has a healthy amount of hyper armor to make up for it. Stamp Sweep's issues stem from its poorly programmed cancel windows, abysmal poise bonuses, stiffly programmed tracking windows, and abysmal recovery. To mitigate this, all cancel windows have been adjusted. Guard and movement cancel windows begin on frame 57, and the dodge cancel window begins on frame 58. I've gutted the previous turn speed events and redid them from the ground up. From frame 1 to 19, the follow-up attack will track infinitely, preventing strafing as it did in the vanilla game. This will allow you much more freedom in how you aim this attack manually. This will also prevent the first hit from whiffing. I've increased the animation speed by 30% from frames 19 to 34. However, this does not affect the startup frames of the attack at all, coming out on frame 19 like it did in vanilla. This change makes the animation look less clumsy and cumbersome. It's purely cosmetic. To fix its low poise problem, I've added a super armor event to the follow-up, preventing this attack from being poise broken once this bonus becomes active. Like vanilla, this attack still requires 31 frames of startup at the least. While it's just as slow as it is in vanilla, it has everything it needs to compensate for its full second of startup. Stamp Upward Cut suffered the same issues as Sweep, with even slower startup. To mitigate those issues, I've gutted the turn speed events and redid them completely. From frame 1 to 26, the follow-up attack will track infinitely, rendering it unstrafable like vanilla. The follow-up attack was also changed to have super armor just as Sweep. Lastly, all cancel windows of the follow-up end on frame 53. This Ash of War is still just as slow as it is in vanilla, coming out on frame 39, but it now has all the tools it needs to compensate for it. One last thing. The stomping part of both Stamp Ashes have had their light attack cancel changed to begin on frame 13, and their weapon switch cancel windows begin on frame 24. This provides a bit more mix-up options and freedom of movement in how you use this Ash in neutral. Square Off was great in Dark Souls 3 because you could cancel into the follow-ups much earlier, and the heavy follow-up had poise. We already have a pretty great framework for this one, but I'll take it a step further. For starters, you can cancel the stance animation into either follow-up as early as frame 4. Lastly, I've added a poise event to both follow-ups of Square Off. This will grant you a flat poise bonus of 150, the same amount you get when you execute the Kick Ash of War. I figured that Kick got hyper armor, I might as well put some hyper armor on the guard break skill that costs FP as well. With the 4 frames of startup added to the 7 frames of poise startup, these follow-ups grant poise as early as frame 11, putting them in line with similar attacks. The issues of Wild Strikes include its relatively slow startup and inconsistent cancel windows on the follow-up attacks. To mitigate these issues, I've increased the speed of the first 23 frames of both follow-up attack animations by 31%. Lastly, I've adjusted all cancel windows on the heavy attack follow-up. The cancel windows of guard and weapon switch now begin on frame 55. The cancel windows of items, movement, and skill button cancel windows now begin on frame 57. The dodge cancel window begins on frame 58. This adds some much needed polish to the heavy follow-up of Wild Strikes, allowing you to act earlier than you were able to before, putting it more in line with the light attack follow-up. Wild Strikes was decent before, so I haven't changed too much about it, but now it should be much more worth your time. Unfortunately, I have no damn clue on how to fix the hit stop and the spine shatter bug. The issues with Lion's Claw stem mainly from its terrible tracking. You could definitely argue that it's way too slow, having a 43 frames of startup, but I would argue that it possesses the necessary boons to compensate for its slow speed. It just lacks the ability to make use of them. Firstly, I completely gutted the turn speed events and redid them entirely. The changes I've made allow you much more freedom in how you aim the attack. This is due to a turn speed event I've added that tracks the opponents just as you begin the front flip part. This will aid you in beginning the forward advancing part of the attack where your opponent is, and not where they were 20 frames ago. The other big change in the turn speed events are an event I've added that tracks your target's location right as you begin the downward slam attack. This prevents you from flying past your opponent and missing completely, like it was in vanilla. Lastly, the cancel windows of light attack, guard, dodge, and item now begin on frame 81. The cancel windows for movement, offhand attacks, and weapon skills now begin on frame 92. The weapon switch cancel window now begins on frame 72. For those asking about the weapon cancel window being 29 frames faster than some of the other ones, I took inspiration from its sibling Ash, Savage Lion's Claw. This will allow you to keep priority even after your opponent dodges and continue your offensive pressure. However, any good opponent will still whiff punish you for missing. And yes, I've also kept its vanilla armor properties. If you're wondering why frame 1 armor works for Lion's Claw and it's problematic on other skills like Storm Stomp or Storm Assault, this is because the hitbox on those Storm Ashes activates nearly twice as fast, allowing you to reaction trade with most weapons in the game. With Lion's Claw, you can't reaction trade against most attacks in the game. This is because your opponent has 20 or so more frames to recover from their attack and roll away. In 99% of cases, you will not be able to reaction trade using Lion's Claw. In short, its functionality is the same as vanilla, however, it can now make use of the pre-existing boons designed to offset its banes. Kick's issues stem from its terrible tracking and its sluggish cancel windows. I've added 2 turn speed events to its timeline. One will allow you to begin the animation facing your target. The other will track your opponent infinitely during the final 2 frames before the attack becomes active. This effectively makes Kick unstrafable, forcing you to resort to spacing in order to whiff punish it. It's got less range than a dagger with the attack speed of a colossal weapon. If you get hit by this, you got outplayed. Next, I've unified all cancel windows excluding the right-hand attack cancel window to begin on frame 41. However, the right-hand attack cancel window will now begin on frame 35. This will allow larger weapons such as colossal swords and weapons to more consistently true combo off of landing a successful kick, and not just the already dominant fast weapons. In short, it's a slow attack designed for point-blank combat, but rewarding when landed and less sluggish or cumbersome.
Good on the Viper!
I mean, the Ground Slam and Golden Slam both got the same treatment. Their issues stem from poorly programmed tracking events, horrific recovery, and horrifically slow attack startup. I've decided to address these issues directly. Firstly, I've increased the first 28 frames of the jumping animation by 25% for Ground Slam and 75% for Golden Slam. Next, I've adjusted the tracking windows to allow you to initiate the jump in the direction of your opponent. Lastly, I've adjusted the cancel windows of Weapon Switch to begin on frame 23. Attack, dodge, and guard begin on frame 25, and movement begins on frame 27. In short, the attack now functions similarly to its vanilla counterpart, but with added polish that makes the move feel less sluggish and cumbersome. If it wasn't obvious, Trollololol Roar is slow as shit. I've increased the first 17 frames of the Roar animation by 34%. I then adjusted the cancel windows as such. Right-hand attack begins on frame 59, weapon switch and guard begin on frame 70, and movement begins on frame 71. For the follow-up attack, I've added a super armor event on frame 1, making this attack immune to poise breaks. I then increased the first 30 frames of the animation by 20%. Then increase the following 30 frames by 150%. Following that, I've adjusted the tracking events to infinitely track your opponent for 2 frames before the attack becomes active. In short, the roar comes out slightly faster, and the follow-up is not a meme attack anymore. Double Slash has always been pretty decent on smaller weapons. However, when you use it on medium-sized weapons such as greatswords, its usefulness plummets. I can totally understand and agree with the idea of making certain Ashes of War slower on certain weapon classes. In this specific case, I disagree with this decision. I could have added hyper armor to this Ashe and called it a day, but in my opinion, there are already plenty of Ashes to choose from when it comes to reliable, poise-possessing, hard-hitting attacks. I've ultimately decided to increase the speed of all attack animations of medium-class double slash. The first 58 frames of the first and second attack animations have been sped up by 29%. The first 18 frames of the final attack animation have been increased by 24%. This will allow this attack to be much more threatening and neutral. However, its poise damage is still relatively low as it is in vanilla. Prelate's charge's issues stem from its slow activation speed, clashing with its terrible tracking and punishing recovery. However, it's riddled with active hitboxes, so balancing this one was definitely tricky. I've slightly adjusted the tracking event of the running part of this Ashe so it tracks a little bit better. I changed the turn speed from 120 to 150, so it's slightly better, but not by a whole lot. I've adjusted the upward strike at the end of the Ashe to track infinitely for 2 frames before the attack becomes active. I've adjusted the cancel windows on that same animation as such. Right-hand attack cancel begins on frame 54. Guard, dodge, and weapon switch cancel begins on frame 55. Movement begins on frame 56. In short, the attack tracks slightly better, and it's a little bit harder to punish, making it safer to use. Spectral Lance. I bet you forgot about this one. To the best of my knowledge, this is the only Ash of War that has been power crept by a fucking consumable. Imagine that. See Dragon Communion Harpoons. Anyways, forget listing off its weaknesses, let's just make the damn thing comparable to the consumable version. For starters, I've increased the first 54 frames of the attack animation by 31%. Next, I've adjusted the cancel windows as such. Right-hand attack cancel begins on frame 55. Guard and weapon switch cancel begins on frame 57. Weapon skill and dodge cancel begins on frame 62. And movement cancel begins on frame 63. For good measure, I've adjusted the throw animation tracking to track infinitely for a duration of 4 frames, 1 frame before the bullet becomes active. To clarify, this is the animation, not the spear. The bullet flies in a straight line at the same velocity as vanilla. Lastly, Lifesteal Fist. Trying to land this attack sucks. However, getting hit by this attack sucks even more. And with 33 frames of startup, landing it is pretty rough. On the same note, there's not much to counteract its slow startup and abysmal range. To mitigate, I'll add a simple poise event to the timeline that begins on frame 14 and ends on frame 47. This poise bonus will grant you a flat 120 poise upon hyper armor activation. For reference, this is the same amount you get while using Waterfowl Dance. Not much, but it's something. Lastly, I'll adjust the tracking properties so it becomes unstrafable at point blank, forcing you to resort to outspacing it in order to punish it. With its dog-ass range, this will prove to be very easy. In short, it's much more of a threat at close range as it was designed to be. However, its range and speed still remains as bad as it was in vanilla, which is okay. At least now it should have the proper tools to offset its banes. Oh, my god, that was a lot. What do you think of all these suggested changes? What do you agree on? What do you disagree on? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's all I've got for this video. Until next time.